Colonia Dignidad was a secretive German settlement in Chile that operated as a cult-like enclave for over 4 decades, from its founding in 1961 until its dissolution in the early 2000s. Under the authoritarian leadership of Paul Schäfer, a former Nazi soldier and convicted pedophile, the colony became notorious for its systematic human rights abuses, including the torture and murder of political prisoners during Augusto Pinochet's military dictatorship in the 1970s and 80s. The Colonia Dignidad case is significant because it represents a dark chapter in both Chilean and German history, involving the collaboration between a repressive regime and a cult that perpetrated heinous crimes against its own members and the wider population. Colonia Dignidad was located in a remote area of central Chile, about 35 kilometers east of the town of Peril. The victims of the colony's abuses can be divided into 2 main groups: inhabitants of the settlement, who were subjected to sexual abuse, torture, forced labor, and other forms of mistreatment by Schäfer and other leaders. Chilean citizens, especially political opponents of Pinochet's regime, who were tortured and murdered at the colony's secret detention and torture centers. It's estimated that over 100 of Pinochet's opponents were killed at Colonia Dignidad, representing a significant portion of Chile's disappeared during the dictatorship. Colonia Dignidad was founded in 1961 by Paul Schäfer, who had fled West Germany to escape child molestation charges. The colony's most notorious period was during Pinochet's military dictatorship, which lasted from 1973 to 1990. During this time, Schäfer collaborated with Pinochet's secret police, DINA, to provide facilities for the detention, interrogation, and torture of political prisoners. The colony also served as a secret weapons cache and manufacturing site for the regime. After Pinochet's fall from power in 1990, Colonia Dignidad continued to operate under Schäfer's leadership until 2005, when he was finally arrested in Argentina and extradited to Chile to face charges of child sexual abuse. The colony was then renamed Villa Baviera and has since undergone a gradual transition, with some of its economic and organizational structures remaining in place. Colonia Dignidad was not the work of a single killer, but rather a decades-long campaign of abuse, torture, and murder carried out by a cult-like group under the leadership of Paul Schäfer, a former Nazi soldier and convicted pedophile. From the very beginning, Schäfer used his position as the colony's leader to sexually abuse children, both from within the settlement and from neighboring villages. He would often have young boys sit on his lap while preaching to the community. Schäfer also drugged inhabitants with potent psychopharmaceuticals to control and subdue them. During the Pinochet dictatorship in the 1970s and 80s, Colonia Dignidad served as a secret detention and torture center for opponents of the regime. Schäfer collaborated with Pinochet's secret police, DINA, to imprison, interrogate, and torture political prisoners at the colony's facilities. Witness accounts describe the horrific methods used by Schäfer and his followers, including waterboarding, electric shocks, and beatings. More than 100 of Pinochet's opponents were murdered at Colonia Dignidad, representing a significant portion of Chile's disappeared during the dictatorship. The inhabitants of Colonia Dignidad, most of them German immigrants, were subjected to a regime of forced labor, physical abuse, and psychological manipulation by Schäfer and other leaders. They were deprived of their liberty and forced to work long hours without pay for the collective benefit of the colony. Schäfer's authoritarian leadership style and the cult-like structure of the settlement allowed him to maintain control over the residents, who lived under strict rules and were subjected to indoctrination and punishment for disobedience. The crimes committed at Colonia Dignidad have left a lasting impact on Chile and Germany, and the process of seeking justice and accountability for the victims and their families has been slow and difficult. Despite the formal end of the dictatorship in 1990, Colonia Dignidad continued to operate under Schäfer's leadership until his arrest in 2005. The colony was then renamed Villa Baviera, and some of its economic and organizational structures remain in place today. The investigation into the crimes committed at Colonia Dignidad unfolded over several decades, revealing a complex web of human rights violations and criminal activities. Between 1961 and 2005, systematic violations of human rights were committed at Colonia Dignidad, including sexual abuse, torture, and forced labor against inhabitants of the settlement and Chileans from the vicinity. The crimes extended to a repressive alliance between the colony and the Chilean civil-military dictatorship, resulting in the torture and murder of political prisoners, with over 100 people presumed to have been killed. Despite the formal end of the dictatorship in 1990, Colonia Dignidad continued its criminal activities until the detention of Paul Schäfer in 2005, prompting calls for the closure of the enclave by the Chilean state. The investigation faced challenges due to the secretive and cult-like nature of the colony, as well as the wide range of factors that allowed Colonia Dignidad to continue its operations despite its criminal history. Evidence emerged from witness testimonies, survivor accounts, and the uncovering of torture chambers and burial sites within the compound, shedding light on the extent of the atrocities committed at the colony. The absence of a memorial site at the location created tensions between residents and victims' collectives, highlighting the difficulties in advancing the clarification, punishment of crimes, and implementation of comprehensive memory policies and reparation measures. Schäfer used his position as the leader of the colony to perpetrate sexual abuse, torture, and forced labor against inhabitants and political prisoners, collaborating with the Pinochet regime. He was identified and apprehended in 2005 in Argentina, leading to the closure of the enclave and the renaming of the colony to Villa Baviera. Schäfer's authoritarian leadership style and manipulation of his followers allowed him to maintain control over the community, instilling fear and obedience through a combination of indoctrination and punishment. His motives stemmed from a desire for power, control, and the perpetuation of his criminal activities under the guise of a philanthropic settlement, exploiting the vulnerability of his victims for his own gain. Following Schäfer's apprehension, legal proceedings were initiated to bring him to justice for his role in the crimes committed at Colonia Dignidad. The trial presented key evidence of the systematic abuses, witness testimonies, and survivor accounts, painting a harrowing picture of the atrocities that took place within the compound. Schäfer was ultimately sentenced for his crimes, marking a significant moment in the pursuit of justice for the victims and their families. Schäfer was convicted and sentenced for his involvement in sexual abuse, torture, and murder at Colonia Dignidad, facing the consequences of his actions after years of evading justice. The verdict and sentencing served as a form of closure for the victims' families and the community, bringing a measure of accountability for the heinous crimes committed at the colony. The case of Colonia Dignidad left a lasting impact on the victims' families and the wider community, highlighting the importance of seeking justice and reparations for the atrocities committed at the colony. The investigation into the crimes at Colonia Dignidad led to changes in law enforcement practices, increased public awareness of human rights violations, and a push for comprehensive memory policies and reparation measures. The enduring fascination with the case reflects its significance in exposing the dark history of the colony and the lessons learned about the dangers of unchecked power and the importance of vigilance against human rights abuses. So, what were the key challenges faced by investigators during the Colonia Dignidad case? The colony's secretive and isolated nature made it difficult for investigators to gather evidence and witness testimonies. The cult-like structure of the settlement, with its authoritarian leadership and control over inhabitants, hindered the ability of investigators to penetrate the colony and uncover the full extent of the crimes. The slow progress of investigations resulted in biological impunity as victims, their relatives, and perpetrators passed away, making it increasingly difficult to hold perpetrators accountable. The silence of perpetrators and the lack of a memorial site at the former colony further complicated the process of seeking justice and reparations for the victims. How did the suspects in the Colonia Dignidad case come to be identified and apprehended? Key suspects in the Colonia Dignidad case were identified and apprehended through a combination of investigative efforts, legal proceedings, and international cooperation. Suspects in the Colonia Dignidad case were identified through extensive investigations conducted by authorities in Chile and Germany, as well as international collaboration between the two countries. The investigations focused on uncovering the systematic human rights violations, including sexual abuse, torture, and murder, that took place at the colony under the leadership of Paul Schäfer and other key figures. As a result of the investigations, indictments were issued against several suspects involved in the crimes committed at Colonia Dignidad, including individuals like Willie Malesa, who was indicted in the case and ordered into detention. There have been several trials and legal proceedings related to the crimes committed at Colonia Dignidad with mixed outcomes, convictions, and sentences. In 2019, 3 German citizens and 2 Chileans were sentenced to 5 years and 1 day of imprisonment for crimes related to Colonia Dignidad. In another case, 4 persons were sentenced to 7 years of imprisonment for an offense concerning arms. For the aggravated abduction of 1 person, 2 defendants were convicted and sentenced to 10 years and 1 day of imprisonment, while 6 persons were sentenced to 5 years and 1 day for the aggravated abduction of another person. For the aggravated homicide of another person, the leader of the group was sentenced to 7 years of imprisonment, and 2 German citizens who were accessories to the crime were sentenced to 551 days of imprisonment. Ongoing investigations and challenges. In Germany, investigations against Hartmut Hopp, Colonia Dignidad's physician and Paul Schäfer's right-hand man, were closed in early 2019, disappointing survivors and witnesses who had been willing to provide evidence. Hopp, who was sentenced in Chile to 5 years imprisonment for aiding the sexual abuse of minors but escaped punishment by fleeing to Germany, has not faced legal consequences for his alleged crimes in Germany. The lack of progress in the German investigations has shaken survivors and witnesses' trust in the justice system, and European Center for Constitutional and Human Rights has filed a disciplinary complaint and a request for legal examination. While some convictions and sentences have been handed down, particularly in Chile, the pursuit of justice for the victims of Colonia Dignidad has faced significant challenges, including the lack of progress in German investigations, the potential application of statutory limitations, and the existence of amnesty laws in Chile. The Colonia Dignidad case, a dark chapter in history, involved a German sect in Chile responsible for heinous crimes including systematic sexual abuse, torture, and murder. The enclave was used to torture and disappear opponents of the Pinochet regime, with children from the colony and neighboring areas subjected to horrific abuse. The case highlighted the collaboration of exiled Germans with the criminal Pinochet regime and the failure of German and Chilean authorities to address the crimes for decades. Despite the long history of impunity enjoyed by the sect's leaders, progress has been made in recent years. Legal interventions and criminal complaints have been filed against key figures like Hartmut Hopp and Reinhard Göring. While some suspects have faced convictions and sentences in Chile, challenges persist, including the slow progress of investigations and the existence of statutory limitations and amnesty laws. The ongoing legal proceedings against individuals like Hartmut Hopp offer hope for justice, with pressure from Chilean authorities increasing the likelihood of sentences being enforced. The case serves as a reminder of the importance of seeking accountability for past atrocities, addressing human rights violations, and implementing comprehensive memory policies and reparation measures. The pursuit of justice for the victims of Colonia Dignidad continues, reflecting the enduring impact of the crimes and the quest for truth and closure.